Hello, everyone. It's 7 o'clock. We have quite a few people who are online, but we're expecting more. So my suggestion is that we just give it another 2 minutes, if that's okay. Let me just check the screen. And I think we have right now, we have about 170 people online, participants or members of the public, plus our panel, which is a great turnout. So we're just going to give it another couple of minutes before we get this evening session kicked off. Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Bruce Davis and I'm your host and facilitator this evening. I'm a consultant hired by the City of Toronto to assist with community engagement, and I'll be facilitating this online session tonight. The land we're discussing today on Cedarvale Avenue is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And this area is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. I also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. The purpose of tonight's session is to provide information to members of the public regarding a proposal for 64 modular apartments at the corner of Cedarvale and Trenton Avenues in East York. We're here to share information, but also to hear from you, to answer as many questions as possible, and also to take down your comments. I wanted to mention at the outset, my technical co-host for this evening is Rishab Meehan, Councillor Bradford's Chief of Staff. And tonight's session is being recorded and will be made available on the city's website at toronto.ca/modular housing. The city's also retained the services of Lura Consulting, an independent community liaison office, to report on the community feedback and to prepare a report that summarizes the input. Later tonight, I'll tell you more about how you can contact Lura directly. Tonight's session is part of a community engagement process, and we have a meeting set up for March 17th and another meeting scheduled for May 3rd, so you can write those dates down. But tonight's meeting has been called specifically by Councillor Brad Bradford, Councillor for Ward 19, Beaches East York. And I'm going to ask Councillor Bradford to kick off tonight's session, and then I believe that he's introducing a very special guest. Councillor Bradford, over to you.
Thanks very much, Bruce. I will be brief. For folks who I haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name is Brad Bradford. I'm the City Councillor here in Beaches East York. And, it is fantastic to see so many folks on the line tonight for this important conversation. I apologize for the short notice, but I am glad you are here with us. I'm going to be brief because tonight is straight up. It's about listening and hearing from everyone on the line and in attendance. I am here to listen, as are my colleagues, fellow elected representatives, and the whole team of staff who we have on the line. So first, I want to start off by acknowledging just how important this meeting is. As Bruce mentioned, I called for this urgent meeting tonight to preempt the March 17th meeting because I wanted to get this conversation started. And it's not an easy one. I heard from a range of views and concerns when I went out to the doors Saturday morning, met a bunch of folks in the parks and on the streets adjacent to the site. Views were expressed and I was happy to hear them. But I am a firm believer that, nothing worth doing comes easily. And I know that East York is a community that cares, and neighbors are not afraid of rolling up their sleeves and working together. The second thing I want to start off by acknowledging is that, the rollout of this proposal should have been different. It was not done well. We should have had more information, more dialogue earlier. The last 2 weeks, I think, have been really tough on residents and neighbors and our community as a whole. It just goes to show how challenging these conversations can be here in Toronto, and that hasn't changed. But I think there's a lot of lessons learned for the city. Tonight is about getting this back on track. That is why we are here. I've asked city staff from various departments involved in putting this proposal together to have this urgent meeting and be on the line with us tonight. They are going to be walking you through a presentation, answering your questions, providing the level of detail that we should have gotten to you sooner. So that's going to be really important, and I know we're all looking forward to that. I want to give my biggest, most heartfelt thanks to everyone for being on the line. I know the proposal has caused a lot of questions, a lot of concern, and everyone on the range of views, whether it's full-hearted support, which I've heard a lot of, or if you're here with questions and concerns that need to be addressed, you're on the line tonight, and for that I'm very grateful. I hope the meeting tonight and the one on the 17th, which is next Wednesday, will go some way to addressing those questions, filling in the information, and making sure that we're all on the same page. I want to thank the elected officials from Beaches East York. All of them, our two trustees, our MPP, our MP, are all on the line. They are here to listen as well, and you'll hear from them after the staff presentation. But they're all committed to making sure that we get this right. And finally, I want to thank our special guest, Mayor Tory, for joining us tonight. He is here, like all of us, to listen and work together, to listen to the community to ensure that this project is successful. Again, it's no secret that this has been challenging, but the mayor has been on the phone with me daily, listening to the feedback that I've been communicating from you, and offering his suggestions. When we pull back and look at housing challenges across the entire city, nobody is working harder to deliver affordable housing in Toronto than this mayor, and that is not an easy task. He's been through this on a number of sites now, and he's here with us tonight, and I know he'll be joining us out in the neighborhood as we move forward with this process. So with that, I am here to turn it over to our mayor, John Tory.
Well, Brad, thank you, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And first of all, may I say thank you for taking the time to participate in this tonight. I see from just checking on the participants button on the screen, there's 300 people here already, and that indicates a keen interest in all of this. I will just tell you, I've been 6 years as mayor now, and there is no issue that I have found more challenging and more perplexing and more frustrating than trying to help our homeless population. It's a complicated issue because it involves a lot of different factors and considerations. But I really think we're getting to be on the right path here with something that we're doing in the Toronto way. And I say the Toronto way in a couple of respects. First of all, we went on for years, including the first couple of years, I'll admit, of my own time as mayor, where what we did was we answered the call of people who would stand up at the city council and say we should add 500 more shelter beds, or we should add 1,000 more shelter beds. And we reached a certain point where I just said to my own team and to some of the councillors, and it was maybe even before Brad was elected, we can't go on this way. I mean, it's just not right. It's not right for us as a city. It's not right for the people that we're trying to help, because what they really needed was a home. They needed, yes, there are some people who need a genuine emergency shelter. When they're in a genuine emergency situation, you leave home all of a sudden, or you have some terrible fate befall you where you're temporarily unhoused. But there were people who were ending up, living in the shelters and not getting the support they needed, and not getting themselves back on their feet. And it was frankly not a very businesslike arrangement. It wasn't a very humane arrangement. It just didn't make sense. And so we have moved to creating more homes for people, whether it's through affordable housing or supportive housing. Both are an equal part of what we're doing to try and do much better at something that makes a lot more sense in terms of humanity, and it also makes a lot more sense in terms of the business case for it. And the business case is something that a lot of people don't talk about, but I want to make sure I mention it to you tonight, which is that it actually is going to be a more economically efficient way. I mean, most of it's about humanity and morality, but it's going to be an economically more efficient way to look after and provide a home for people with supports to do it this way than it is just to have one more shelter in one more location, or to expand the shelters in a post-COVID kind of environment. And we've had a unique partnership here. It's a once available opportunity where the federal government has helped to put up the money for this modular housing. We have put up the land, and the provincial government, we're hoping, and we're still working on this, is going to help put up the operating costs for the supports. And I think what's more important than all of that, though, is that sometimes we are inclined, and this is what you see firsthand in a job like Brad's or a job like mine, and I'm not complaining about this, I'm just saying it's an honest observation. You see people saying, well, we want our neighborhoods just to stay the same. And we have so many wonderful neighborhoods. My grandmother lived in East York, so I spent tons of time in East York as a boy. And I know from having spent tons of time as mayor in East York, what a caring community it is and how a stable community it is and so on. But people sort of think, well, there's a choice between that and us looking after some of the people that we need to provide a home for and provide some supports for so they can get back on their feet. There is no choice. As Torontonians, I think we understand that we have to do both, and we want to do both. And I will just say to you that every single time, and as mayor, because I'm the mayor of all the people of the city of Toronto, I've gone from ward to ward to ward to ward, as we did different things in neighborhoods that, yes, brought about some change. And yes, we're not necessarily expected. And I'll join Brad in saying that we've got to find ways to do these things better. And he certainly tried, I should tell you, to make up for the lost opportunity to do it better by spending time on the talking to you. I know that because he talks to me every day, telling me what you've told him. And he's walked the streets, I know, and he's going to continue to do that. And I said I will do that with him because I want to listen to you as to how we can do this right. But I will tell you this, as I've gone from neighborhood to neighborhood to neighborhood, people in Toronto have never disappointed me in that they have said, well, let's do this right. Let's do this right, and let's work together to do this right. And we've made lots of changes and all the different things that we've done in those neighborhoods to accommodate for that and to accommodate for wonderful family neighborhoods like this and all the different things we have to do to make sure that what we do is going to work out and be compatible. But the other thing that I can tell you from every single one of those instances, without exception, is that a few months later, the people in that very same neighborhood are the ones that are going around to see if they can put some plants in the new residences that are near them, or if they can have a trivia night, or if they can help decorate for Christmas, or if they can generally make friends with their new neighbors. And that makes me so proud to be the mayor of the city, because I know that people initially, everybody's the same way. We're human beings and we don't like change that much a lot of the time, but I think we know what's right is right. We know what's right is right. And we know that we can make these things work if we just have open minds and open hearts, which I know Torontonians do. So I'm just saying, let's start tonight, and we have some things we have to get on the table, and I'm here to listen, and Brad's here to listen, and we're all here to listen, and I appreciate very much the support of the other elected representatives too. But this is something that is bigger than all of us. It is about how we treat our fellow citizens who are down on their luck, who have some special needs for special support, and how we can do that in a way that is compatible with our values as Torontonians. Those core values you can't shake from us, you can't change, no matter what. They're good core values. They're solid core values. And so, we will listen tonight, all of us. I'm here to listen. And I'm here to listen and to try and figure out things we can do to make all of this better. But I'm also here because I'm confident, based on all the prior experience I've had, that this will be, in the end, a success. It will add to this neighborhood. It will make it a better city and a better place to live. And I thank you very much for your patience, for your understanding, and I look forward to listening tonight.
Thank you very much, Mayor Tory. I know that you have other things in your schedule tonight, but we appreciate you being here, and I know that you're going to
sticking with you, Bruce. Sticking with you.
Thank you for that. So tonight we've assembled a panel, and we'll be providing information. We also have slides. So these slides will be made available online once this session is over. And I believe that we're also recording tonight's session and making that available online as well. In terms of the agenda, there's about 30 minutes of presentations, and then we're hoping to deal with a lot of the questions that have come in advance, pre-submitted, and then we'll open the floor to comments or questions from members of the public. I think we have about 330 members of the public on right now. When we get a little farther along in the meeting, I'll just explain how to submit your questions, either in writing or you can open up your mic. And we have had people say online already that we're going to be screening the questions. That's just not true. We will listen to the questions, we will open your mic, and then you can give us your feedback and comments. We'll try and get through as many comments tonight as possible. As with any meeting I facilitate, I always like to remind participants to keep their comments concise, constructive, and considerate of other views. The shorter the question or comment, of course, the more people get an opportunity to speak. And if you don't get a chance this week, we have another meeting set up for next week, as well, as you know. I know that many people have strong views about this proposal, pro and con, and I just ask people to be considerate and not to use language that would further victimize the people we're trying to support through this initiative, or to use hurtful or hateful language. If you're just joining us, my name is Bruce Davis and I'm your host and facilitator this evening. I'm a consultant hired by the City of Toronto to assist with community engagement around the proposal for modular housing on Cedarvale Avenue, and I'll be facilitating this online session tonight. If you're participating through your computer or your phone, you will have the ability to speak and ask questions after the presentations. I'm just going to ask our panel members to turn on their cameras if it's possible. We have a panel for this evening, including several key individuals from the City of Toronto and some consultants. Just let everyone get their cameras on. I'll just do some quick introductions. Abigail Bond. Abby Bond is the Executive Director of the city's Housing Secretariat, and she's leading the city in terms of its plans to move forward with 40,000 affordable housing units. 18,000 of those are supportive housing units. 1,000 of those are modular housing units. So we're going to hear from Abby in a couple of minutes about that big plan, how it works. Michael Whelan is the Senior Vice President of Development at Create TO, which is the city's real estate development arm. Create TO is working with the city's corporate real estate division on site selection. So we're going to hear from Michael about how this site was selected, and you can hear directly from them. Sharon Hill is a professional planner with the city planning and the strategic planning unit, and she'll speak to some of the planning issues and how the city's department is assessing its own application for this modular housing site. And we have other city planning folks who are available tonight as resource people. We'll call on them when and if there's a question that relates that we need their help with. Kevin Hutchison is the architect with Montgomery System. Kevin can speak to the specifics of the building, how it works, and the site plan issues and the aesthetic issues related to the building. Tonight, because one of the issues we've heard a lot about so far is parking. So tonight we've asked Mark Jameson of the BA Consulting Group to speak to the parking issues and the parking assessment that they've done related to this. Mark is an engineer, and BA Consulting Group was retained to prepare the parking assessment study for the proposal. And as I said, there are other city staff on standby. So when and if we need them, we can ask them to come forward. I should also mention that our MP, our MPP, and our school trustees are also on the call, and we will bring them in at a little later time in the meeting after we've heard from the panel. So we want to make sure that we hear from them. So enough about the introductions. Let's get started with the agenda. First, we're going to hear about the overall plan for modular housing. Then we'll hear how the sites were selected. Then we'll hear how city planning is reviewing the proposals. Then we'll get into some specifics about the building and the parking issues. That should take us hopefully just under 30 minutes, and then we'll do questions. So let's get started with the overview. And I'm going to call on Abby Bond, the Executive Director of the city's Housing Secretariat. Abby, over to you.
Thank you, Bruce, and good evening, everyone. It's great that so many people could join us. So I have a few slides to lay out for you our modular housing initiative. As Bruce said, this is very much part of our 10-year housing plan, which was approved back in December of last year, and really has a priority to increase the amount of affordable housing supply we see in our city, including 40,000 new affordable homes and 18,000 supportive homes. As Bruce also said, 1,000 of those are going to be modular housing. And phase one of our modular housing included 2 sites with 100 new modular homes, one at 11 Macy Avenue and the other at 321 Dovercourt Road. Both of these buildings went under a similar process as to the one we're rolling out for you tonight. And they opened around Christmas time, either one just before and one just after Christmas time. The phase 2 that we're rolling out is 150 modular homes to be built in 2021. And all of these homes will be permanent rental housing for people experiencing homelessness. Next slide, please. So important things to note is all the residents here will be renters. They will be subject to the Residential Tenancies Act with both rights and responsibilities like other renters in your community. The tenants here will pay around 30% of their income or their shelter allowance of the benefits that they receive towards the rent. And the city will work with the federal and provincial governments to ensure that rent subsidies enable these projects to be managed well, but also make sure that they stay affordable. Each site will be managed by an experienced nonprofit housing provider with on-site services and shared amenities. And this staffing will be 24/7, 365 days a year. Next slide, please. So a key part of success is the quality of the nonprofit operator that we pick for these sites. And so we're looking for an organization, and here are some of the criteria that we use. So experience in working in local communities, experience managing both affordable and supportive housing. We're looking at their management team qualifications, the financial viability of their organization, having a strong track record in both tenant and community communications, and experience with working with a range of different renters, including marginalized and vulnerable groups. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the need for supportive housing, and Mayor Tory and Councillor Bradford already touched on this earlier, but we have an extreme need for supportive housing in this city right now. Tonight, there is close to 8,000 people experiencing homelessness. This is the latest figures from earlier this year in January. Given the impact of COVID-19 on our shelter system, we've really had to expand the number of spaces in order to maintain physical distancing. And this has put incredible strain, even more than we were experiencing previously, on our shelter system. So as we have talked about already, we're looking to make a pivot away from more shelter provision and towards more homes, more housing. So providing permanent affordable housing with on-site support services will help people, enable them to move out of shelters into new homes. In 2018, our street needs assessment found that really single adults were most likely to experience chronic homelessness compared to families or young people. And this is taken from our sheltered population. There's also some information on here that really over half of the people that we serve are men, with just around 42% being women as well. Next slide, please. So why does supportive housing work? Why are we looking to do that to serve our homeless population? So the range of support services that will be provided on site or is anticipated in this location will be services that support people to maintain their housing stability and prevent evictions, to ensure that they get access to mental health and substance use support, that they're helped to connect and navigate to primary care, to provide them with harm reduction supplies and also relapse prevention, giving them support with daily living, and also connections with community support, such as food security, volunteer employment opportunities, learning opportunities, and income assistance programs. So supportive housing, sometimes known as housing first, really helps people stabilize their lives, enables them to improve health and well-being outcomes so that they can positively contribute to the community and the city they live in. Okay, thank you. I'm going to hand over to Mike Whelan now. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening to talk about the site, and more specifically, the criteria that we've used to select the site. There are several key criteria in selecting a site, and we looked at about 50 different properties across all of Toronto in terms of determining the sites. The typical criteria include local demand for affordable housing, the size and configuration of the site. We typically look for a site that's 25 to 35,000 square feet in the area. We look for flat, unencumbered sites that are paved or grassed or rectangular in shape. We take a look at the development potential. In other words, what can we build there? And we undertake test fits on the sites to determine that as well. We look at the environmental condition of the site. We want to make sure that the sites are clean and they don't require a record of site condition. We look at the official plan designation. You know, are the sites in neighborhoods, apartment neighborhoods, or mixed use areas? Proximity to transit. You know, are the sites close to existing or planned transit? And we also take a look at the proximity to social services. In other words, how close are they to the existing social services in the community? Next slide, please. So in this slide, we actually take a look at the criteria assessment and how does this site stack up against those criteria. So in terms of the ownership, whether it's owned by the city, its agencies, corporations, or boards, yes, the property is owned by the city. The area of the site falls within the range that we're looking at. The characteristics of the site are all met as it relates to this site. In terms of official plan designation, it's neighborhood, so it fits within the criteria that we're looking for. In terms of proximity to public transit, there are several TTC bus routes. You've got the 404 that's close by, cycling lanes on Cosborn and Woodward Avenue. In terms of local demand, you can see that there's a significant demand in the area. And in terms of the proximity to social services, there's several small and medium options under 5 kilometers in terms of distance, including Fresh Choice Store, Wayne's Supermarket, and Sobeys on the Danforth. Banks, there's several banks in the area. The closest one is a TD Bank. It's about 1.2 kilometers away, and there's several others that are located on Danforth Avenue, including CIBC, RBC, and Dominion Securities. We also have a library close by and Michael Garron hospitals within a 2-kilometer radius as well. So next slide, please. This map is just an area of view that highlights where the various social services are. And as you can see from the legend on the right-hand side, the inner circle here is a 1-kilometer radius, and the outer circle is a 2-kilometer radius. So there's fairly significant services, social services within the area of this site. Next slide, please. So let me talk to you a little bit about modular design and its construction. You know, modular housing is a prefabricated building that's completely built within a temperature-controlled factory, and it includes all the finishes, furnitures, and appliances. Once the modules are completed, they're transported to site, they're set on foundations by crane, and then they're joined together like building blocks to make one integrated building. They're high quality, they're affordable, they meet all of the building code requirements, so they're building code compliant. This is permanent housing. They're environmentally sustainable and compatible with the surrounding neighborhoods. Modular housing is typically 30 to 50% faster than conventional construction. So therefore, there's less time spent building them and resulting in less disruption to the community as well. And NRB Modular Solutions has been selected as the building manufacturer. They were the successful proponent in the RFP that we took out to the market. We know their product. They also built the first two buildings in phase 1, and they've built at least 15 projects in the city of Vancouver as well. So a good organization, know the business, and they did a very good job for us in phase 1. Bruce, I think that's it for me, and I'll pass it on back to you.
Michael, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. So Create TO is the proponent for these modular sites, but the city also has to review the proposals. The planning department has to review them to make sure that they fit. So that's where the city planners come in. And I'm just wondering, Sharon Hill, you're with us from City Planning. Could you walk us through how the planning department is reviewing this proposal? Sharon?
Yes, thank you, Bruce, and good evening, everyone. So just, I guess, to set the context, the city's official plan, which is the council adopted plan for the entire city, does set out the framework for wanting to achieve a diversity of housing across the city. So that's in terms of the form of the housing, the tenure of the housing, and of course, the need for affordable housing as well as reflected in that document. So that's a bit of a foundational piece in terms of policy direction. In terms of the actual approval processes, there are 2 planning approvals that are required for this site. The first one is that we need to put in place the zoning regulations that would actually reflect what is proposed for this site. And the second thing we need to do is approve the site plan for the proposal, which is a much more detailed and technical site, a review of the site characteristics and conditions. So what we're proposing to do here, you know, you've heard about the need for housing and the need for affordable housing, and council has requested that city staff look for opportunities to expedite and streamline the approval process so that we can get these new houses built faster and people living in homes more quickly. So what we're proposing to do is to put in place the zoning regulations for the site by having the city request that the province put in place a minister's zoning order. And what that would mean is that the province of Ontario would put in place those zoning regulations under the authority that they have under the Planning Act, as opposed to the city traditionally doing that. And that is a way for us to streamline and get a quicker zoning approval in place. Now, we have put this forth to committee, and council will consider it next week for this site. And what we've suggested is that, and committee has approved, is that we endorse this approach in principle, and that we don't come back with our final recommendations on that zoning process until we've been through the full community consultation process. And then next slide, please. The other thing, of course, we need to do, as I said, is that site plan application, which is the detailed review. And what we're proposing to do, which we again did on the first phase, is we've assembled a staff team. Site plan applications are reviewed by a variety of experts across the city. And we've assembled a team that will be put together, and will be dedicated staff reviewing the site plan application. And what that does is it allows us to have pre-application consultations with the architects, and then to quickly come together and review the applications when they're submitted and pull together that comprehensive feedback. And this is all being done internally within the city of Toronto by city staff, and it will allow us to deliver that site plan approval again faster. And I think the last comment just on the slide, we want the site plan application will come in on March 26th. And as I said, again, we're continuing those community meetings before we make a final recommendation on the zoning order. Thanks, Bruce.
Great, thank you very much, Sharon. Now on to the specifics of the Cedarvale site and the building, the Cedarvale Avenue site and the building. I'd like to call on Kevin Hutchinson, the architect with Montgomery System, to walk us through the plans for this. Kevin, can you, I think we have a slide that shows the building and the site plan here.
Indeed, thank you very much, Bruce. So we'll just do a few slides to give a little bit of a snapshot of what we are looking at here. So this project is going to include 64 studio units. They're fairly modest units. They're about 350 square feet. But they are self-contained units. They've got their own washrooms, their own kitchen, so they're autonomous units. Just like any other multi-unit residential building, there will be indoor and outdoor amenity space associated with the building. So there's a laundry room, a communal kitchen and dining facility, as well as some administrative offices on the ground floor. And I think it has not been mentioned yet, or perhaps it has, that the occupancy for this site is aiming for the end of 2021. Next slide, please. The building overall is about 20 meters wide by 53 meters long in its longest dimension. The property that we're looking at is ideal for this type of application because, again, it is fairly flat and it is quite generously dimensioned. So it's about 28 meters at its narrowest, and it expands to 42 meters at its widest, and its long frontage along Cedarvale is 68 meters. So this works quite well for modular construction. It is also very flat. So it's about a 1 meter difference from Trenton down to Bracebridge, which is quite a small slope considering the length. Generally, what we are looking at are still quite generous setback dimensions from the property lines. From Trenton, it's about 10 meters. So we've got quite a generous landscape buffer between the sidewalk and the building face. As you move on to Cedarvale, there's a 4 meter setback. This is set back a little bit further than some of the properties further south on Cedarvale for reference. And on Bracebridge, we have a 6 meter setback, which again is a little bit further setback than the properties further along Bracebridge. This again to allow for generous landscaping. There is a rear yard amenity space, and in this amenity space, there is stacked bike parking that is covered, so long-term bike parking, as well as an ancillary building for waste storage, and likely a pergola or some outdoor landscape amenities. Should be said that the entrance location is there on the top right at the intersection of Cedarvale and Bracebridge, close to the existing bus stops, with bike parking, short-term bike parking at its entrance. If we go to the next slide. The materiality we're proposing is a combination of residential character wood lap siding, as well as board and batten. And we're proposing a mixture of colors here to break down the scale of the building. One of them is a kind of terracotta red to pick up on some of the red and orange brick buildings in the neighborhood. So that's that color on the left. And then also a kind of charcoal lap siding at the units themselves with cedar accents. Some of the features you're seeing here are a pergola providing a covered entrance with barrier-free access and short-term bike parking right at the front entrance. I can hand it back to you, Bruce.
Great. Thank you very much, Kevin. One of the every one of these modular sites is a little bit different, and one of the issues for this Cedarvale Avenue site is parking. That's come up. The site's currently a parking lot across from the arena and across from the school and the swimming pool. So we've arranged for BA Consulting's Mark Jameson to walk us through their assessment of the parking situation. Mark, are you there? Can you go?
I'm here. Thank you, Bruce. Good evening, everybody. My name is Mark Jameson, and I work for a company called BA Consulting Group. We're a transportation planning and engineering firm, and we've been brought on board by CreateTO to assess and review the implications of the parking on site that is there today, otherwise known as a parking study. The purpose of that parking study was a couple-fold. One was to look at the demand that's generated at the lot today by all the different uses in the area, particularly the clubhouse, the ball diamonds, the arena, and the pool are all very busy activity centers for the community. The parking lot today has approximately 70 spaces. I think the actual number is technically 75, so it's just to confirm that. And it's the primary place where the baseball diamonds and pool users who drive will park. Our study, when it looked at the demands, we went about looking at a number of the occupancy of the park and trying to estimate how many people would drive. And no shock to the community, I would imagine that the peak parking demand time is in baseball season primarily. And that would be evenings and on weekends when there are tournaments. And during those times, the parking lot can and does get full. So that is a full parking lot that is there and repeatedly used. We also know that occasionally during hockey season, it does get utilized as well as overflow parking from East York Arena. And so we're aware of that as well. But generally speaking, the peak time where the demand is highest is during summer and summer season during baseball, when you have all the ball diamonds in use. And so during those times, we found that there are times where it's full and in practical use context is actually overflowing a bit beyond that parking lot already onto the on-streets, the on-street area around. The second part of our assignment was to look at what are potential alternatives for how some of that parking capacity might be made up in the area. And our study has found that there are a number of opportunities that are being explored. These are all currently being assessed by the city in terms of how they may actually come about. So it may feature some or all of these recommendations, but our recommendations included adding some on-street capacity on Cedarvale and Trenton Avenue. There are some parts of those streets today that don't include on-street parking. There's the potential to make some partnerships with the TDSB for Parkside Public School, which has 33 spaces towards the north. And then also D.A. Morrison Middle School to the south also has just over 60 spaces and a combination of these. And there's also the opportunity to make some improved utilization of the curling club parking lot on the south side of Cosburn in terms of better signage and more promotion of that use. So those are the opportunities for adding capacity. And we've also looked at and provided recommendations on how the city might actually consider making it easier not to drive in terms of adding more bike parking to the park, reviewing improvements to TTC service and other measures that actually makes it easier not to drive to reduce the demand. So those recommendations are being reviewed by city staff and will be considered as part of, as well as the public input. Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you very much, Mark. And I suspect that there may be questions afterwards about parking that we can follow up if that comes up. I just want to mention one thing. I misspoke earlier in tonight's session. The proponent for this project is actually the Corporate Real Estate Management Division of the city. It's not CreateTO, and I apologize for getting that wrong. So we had a quick overview of the citywide plan, the site selection process, the city planning process, and the actual plans from the architect and some of the parking issues. I think we have a slide with the process. If we could just put this up. So we're really at the beginning of this process, and I know people feel a little bit like they've been taken by surprise, but this is really kind of a rollout of a community engagement plan. So tonight's meeting, next week's meeting, we have a meeting planned for the beginning of May, all of which is designed to get input from the public and from key stakeholders and from local organizations so that we can digest your feedback and your input. As part of that process, City Council will also be looking at this a couple of times before things are finally decided. So as we've said, I think one of the panelists mentioned this is going to Council this week on the issue of the approach in principle to the Minister's zoning order. But all while that's going on, the site plan review is being undertaken. So there's back and forth between the proponent and the various departments. And then it gets to the point where the buildings are starting to be constructed off-site. And that will start to happen once council gives the green light. That'll happen in parallel with local activities. So this building can be produced effectively and quickly. And these are professionals who do this modular type construction. And then you'll see the nice thing about this modular construction is the on-site construction, the actual disruption to the neighborhood during construction is actually much, much shorter than it would otherwise be. And the buildings are loaded into place. And I've seen this a few times in Toronto already, and it's fascinating to watch. But all of this is with a view to trying to get these homes, these permanent homes built this year so that people can be supported in this community. So that's the timeline. And I know people are skeptical about how this engagement's rolling out, but throughout over the next several months, really, we're designing this to hear from you. So that's the quick overview. One of the other really interesting things about the modular housing process is the fact that it requires support from all three levels of government, federal, provincial, and municipal. This project is being led by the City of Toronto, but the federal government through Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation is playing an important role in the financing, and the provincial government also plays a role with the zoning approval and the services required to support the tenants. And I'm really pleased tonight to introduce our Member of Parliament for Beaches East York, Nathaniel Erskine-Smith. Nathaniel, thank you for joining us. And would you like to say a couple of words?
Thanks, Bruce. I will be brief. Thanks all for joining. I would just emphasize a few different things. One, there are federal dollars invested in the affordable housing and specifically the city's modular housing initiative. In April 2020, the city obviously laid out, as Abby was saying, phase 1 and phase 2. The federal government's being there through an affordable innovation housing fund to support the city in these efforts. And it's really important when you look at the numbers, 8,000 people who are homeless in our city, 6,800 people every night in the shelter system. So we really need to do more to build out housing. Modular housing is a really important part of that. And we will continue to be there for the city. A coming fund, Rapid Housing Fund, is $1 billion nationally, but 203 million will be coming to the city. And so frankly, we need to build more housing and we need to make sure we end the homelessness crisis, and we'll be there as a strong partner. I know most of the questions here relate to site selection, and I'm looking forward to learning more and being a better communicator as well out into the community once I know more through this meeting as well. So thanks for joining and look forward to learning more. And thanks, Brad, for hosting.
Thank you very much for that. Our Member of Provincial Parliament is also with us tonight. Dr. Rhema Mcgowan she's also her party's critic for poverty and homelessness, which is very much a focus of this proposal. Dr. Mcgowan, would you like to say a few words?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so very much for having me. Thanks, Brad, for hosting this. I think it's so important that all the elected officials here are standing shoulder to shoulder. And I want to thank Mayor Tory so much for his very compassionate and thoughtful remarks at the beginning. You know, I've been working on this file of poverty and homelessness for the last almost 3 years now. And I can't stress enough that we were in a homelessness emergency in Ontario and in Toronto before the pandemic started, and it's just become so much worse. People are pushed into homelessness through systemic factors that have nothing to do with their characters. And it's really important that we see ourselves as the village that is working to pull people together and to get them out of homelessness and back into housing. Housing is the very first thing you need when people are putting their lives back together after these kinds of disasters. And it is so much cheaper to house people than to have them in homelessness. And obviously it's the right thing to do from a moral perspective. In a week or so, I'm going to also be having a community conversation, not on the specifics of the site, but on the question of housing and how it's so crucial, and the process of moving people back into housing once they've been experiencing homelessness. And I look forward to answering more questions there as well. Thank you so much again for having me.
Thank you very much for those comments. One of the issues that's likely to come up in the question and answer is the impact on Parkside Elementary School. And we're joined tonight by two school trustees, Michelle Arts and Angela Kennedy. Michelle's with TDSB. Michelle, would you like to say a few words?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. Yeah, I just wanted to say hello. And I do actually also have some TDSB staff from our planning office and our superintendent of education for the area are here tonight and will be here in the next consultations to learn more about the project and listen to feedback. And the city is, of course, a partner with the TDSB, as is the neighborhood group and other CMHC and other housing partners who support our families in the TDSB. So we're here to listen and see how we can be partners with the city.
Great, thank you very much. Angela Kennedy's our TCTSB trustee for the area. Angela, I'm not sure, can you open your mic? Would you like to say a few words? I apologize, I didn't get a chance to do a sound check with you at the start of the meeting. Angela Kennedy is our Toronto Catholic District School Board trustee. Angela, would you like to say a few words? Can you unmute? There we go. Let's try this. Okay, so why don't we do this? Why don't we move forward with the questions, and then when and if we get our technical issues worked out, we can loop back. How does that sound? I know people are anxious to get to the questions. If you're just joining us, my name is Bruce Davis, and I'm your host and facilitator. I'm a consultant hired by the City of Toronto to assist with community engagement around the proposal for modular housing on Cedarvale Avenue, and I'm facilitating tonight's online session. If you're participating through your computer and you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, there's a couple of ways you can do it. You can raise your hand, and then you can go in that way. You would go into the queue, and then we can call on you one by one, and you can actually make a comment or ask your question, or you can type your question into the Q&A box. Don't type it into the chat, but if you type it into the Q&A, and then we can just read it off. If you're on your phone, you can press *9 on your phone, and then you'll go into the queue, and then we'll select you and ask you to unmute at that time. We are not pre-screening the calls, and we'll take them starting at the top of the list, and we'll work our way down. I should also mention, if you can't get through tonight, you can go to the website toronto.ca/modular housing, and there is a comment form there that you can fill out, and there's some additional information on the website. Now, we've had a lot of questions sent in over the past week or so, and I'm just wondering if we can get some of these frequently asked questions to get things started, and then we'll go open the lines. One of the first questions we get all the time is how the tenants will be selected. Just to tell us a little bit about the tenants. And for this one, I'm going to call on a representative from the city's Shelter Support and Housing Division, Laurel Rain, who's the Director of Service System Planning. Laurel, thank you for being with us. And how about that? How will tenants be selected for this site?
Thank you for the question, Bruce. Yeah, I'm happy to share some information about that. So future residents will be referred through our coordinated access system, which is a best practice approach that's used in many communities to assessing, prioritizing, and connecting people experiencing homelessness to housing and supports that best meet their needs. So potential tenants will be coming from our shelters and 24-hour respite sites, as well as our COVID response programs like the shelter hotels, as well as directly from the streets or encampments. Through our coordinated access system, we have a common assessment that's used to better understand the type and level of support that each individual needs in order to maintain their housing stability. And our coordinated access team will be working closely with the selected operator to ensure that the supports that are available on site in the building are the right match for the tenants being referred, so we can ensure that these tenancies are going to be successful for those individuals.
Laurel, maybe I can just ask a follow-up question, because one of the things we're asked is how do we know if some of the tenants will be from the area, or what can be done, if anything, to try and get support for people in the area, because we see people in the area who are homeless, obviously. So how do we fit that into the criteria?
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. You know, homelessness affects people throughout our city in all neighborhoods. And we do make efforts through this referral and matching process to connect people who have a connection with the area. So potentially referrals from local shelters or local encampments, wherever possible, to buildings like this one.
Great, thank you very much. One of the other frequently asked questions we get is, how will this affect community safety? You know, people see things on TV of other places in other parts of the city, and they're worried about safety. And in particular, we've heard obviously from parents and concerns about the school. And I'm happy to start and speak about that piece. And then Abby, maybe you can just jump in after me if that's okay. And the reason I wanted to address is two things, really. I've been working with some of the communities that already have modular housing. So there's one on Macy Avenue in Scarborough, and there's one on Dovercourt in Ward 9. And the other reason I always like to address this question is because I was a school trustee for 10 years. So I'm very hyper vigilant about the impact on children and families. And I think it's important we address that. So on the issue of what's happening currently at the two modular sites, keep in mind, these are just now starting, but one of the issues the neighborhood was concerned about is the impact on the neighborhood. What's going to happen in the park across the street? What's going to happen with kids going to school? And I have checked in with the neighborhood, and I've checked in with local counselors, and I've checked in with the local division neighborhood police. And the worries about issues happening in the neighborhood have not materialized. You know, people were talking about, oh, there will be drug paraphernalia in the park, or oh, there will be this, and touch wood, and we're really, really happy to say that has not materialized. In fact, we should not really start from the premise that there will be some kind of community crime associated with that. It's not really, we don't think that's a healthy way to approach this. We are putting supports in place to help people to make this next step into permanent housing. And even starting from the premise that there will be neighborhood crime has turned out not to be true, at least in those sites that we've seen. But the other cool thing that we did is we did get the community together to do what's called a SEPTID audit, a crime prevention through environmental design. And we walked through the park and we looked at issues like lighting and how the benches are done and the shrubs and so on. And it was just a great process for the neighborhood, regardless of whether or not the modular housing was coming in. And that was led by the local counselor. And it was a really, really healthy exercise. So it's maybe something that we want to look at for this site. As far as the school is concerned, one of the things that we may want to do is just to set up a liaison with the school community, either the school council or some parents who are particularly interested in this, and just work through any issues or concerns that they may have and set up that kind of regular liaison through the counselor's office with the service providers. There will be a landlord who's responsible for managing the project and for managing the site, and they want to work closely with the community. So I think setting up that kind of community network ongoing before, during, and after construction, I think that would be a really, really valuable way of dealing with some of the neighborhood anxiety, if I could call it that, around this site. So that was my direct experience. And certainly having worked at the school board, I'm very accustomed to working with individual schools to make sure that children are safe, whether it's pick up and drop off, just traffic around dropping kids off at school or walking them to and from school. It's really, really important in any neighborhood school. And I think we can certainly add that to the community liaison piece here. Abby, did you want to say anything about community safety?
Yes, thanks, Bruce. And you've touched on many important aspects of community safety, and it's definitely one of the things that we hear from communities that they're worried about. We have right now in Toronto almost 11,000 supportive housing units in many different communities and many different parts of the city, many of which are close to other community amenities. So the proposal here is not new in concept. This is something we already have in our city. We just don't have enough of it to meet the demand from the people who are living outside or living in our shelters. I would also say that a key aspect of dealing with the community safety, as Laurel mentioned, making sure that the right people are connected to the right supports. And a big part of that is who we bring on to be the nonprofit operator, and the kinds of the track record that they have in building a safe and successful community both inside the building and outside the building are going to be key parts of the success here, and ones that we're very pleased we've been able to do for the first 2 buildings. I just wanted to finish by mentioning that there are, for those of you who are interested in more information about this, there are a number of really great studies. One that was done by the Wellesley Institute in 2011 on some of Toronto's supportive housing, and one that was done by BC Housing back in 2017 in BC for their supportive housing program. And both of these studies address 2 of the key issues that we hear from communities often, that crime is going to increase, community safety is going to go down, and property values are going to go down. And so these studies both address some of those issues head on through talking to neighbours, and also through quantitative research as well. So if you're interested, we can provide the links to both of those studies. And basically the outcome is that when these buildings are managed well, which we're intending to do with the right operator, then there is no reason for us to assume that community safety is going to be negatively impacted by these buildings. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much, Abby. Does anyone else on the panel want to jump in on the issue of community safety? It's hard for me to see with all of these windows. Okay, so let's go to the next frequently asked questions. This is about parking now. Mark Jameson at BA Consulting Group had spoken about the parking assessment study, and this is, an ongoing process. Mark, do you want to maybe expand a little bit on what can be done to create more parking spaces that could meet this current demand?
Thanks, Bruce. And I'll also touch on a few of the questions I've seen pop up in the comments just quickly, because I know there was a few clarifications that were asked for. With respect to the parking potential replacement, so one of the outcomes of the study was some recommendations for where you might seek to replace some of the 75 spaces that's on the site today. Those recommendations included the on-street spaces that would be added, which we've talked about, and as well as adding and partnering with some of the TDSB schools to replace it. And taken together and in combination with making some better use of the curling club and or the parking lot next to the Taylor Creek Ravine, would seek to replace essentially most of, if not all or more of the parking of the 75 spaces that would be lost. So the intent is to find a suite of solutions that would hopefully replace the majority of the parking spaces being lost. I would note that the parking study is part of the review process. As city staff review, they review the draft findings. There will be an updated study submitted as part of the site plan application that will also get reviewed by city staff again, and will be available to the public to review. And very briefly, I would like to point out a couple things. I saw a question with respect to, was the parking study undertaken during COVID? And I would say it was. We didn't count the existing lot though, because obviously the activity in the park and in the parking lot today is not typical. What we did is what we would call a first principles approach, where we estimated demand looking at the occupancy of the park in a non-COVID situation. So we looked at the schedules for the East York Baseball Association. We looked at the schedules in understanding of the arena operations from the Parks Department and the occupancy of the pool, and also the scheduling of the clubhouse. And we added those all together to get a demand profile. And I did want to acknowledge that lastly, that all of those conclusions are being reviewed and are being discussed with city staff, and we'll get an opportunity to review and update the study at that point.
Great, thank you very much, Mark. So at some point after this draft study has gone back and forth with the city of Calta a couple of times, it will be made available to the public as part of the review process. Is that right?
That's my understanding. I would like to defer to city staff typically to confirm the exact details.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for this. I know we have a lot of questions. We've got almost 400 people online. I probably see 30 hands up, so I want to make sure I get to questions. And if there are more parking questions that come out of it, I may just draw on some of the other staff who are here to answer those if they're very specific about on-street parking or TDSP parking or whatever. But let's just pause that one for a second. Maybe we can go to the phones or go online. How does that sound? Because I know people are anxious to ask their questions. So what I'll do is I'm going to read out the first 3 people that I have in the queue. I don't know who you are and I don't know what you're going to say, so we're not screening them. And then I'll pick a couple of the questions off the top of the Q&A list and we'll try and make this work. And then we'll continue to let people know. So when we ask you to open your mic, if you could just ask your question, and if you could pose your question to the panel, that would be great. And we'll just try and find the appropriate person to answer it. And of course, if you just have a comment and it's not a question, of course, that's perfectly welcome. As with any meeting I facilitate, I always like to remind participants to keep their comments concise, constructive, and considerate of other views. The shorter the question or comment, the more people get a chance to speak. And we know, of course, that people have strong views about this proposal, pro and con. And I just ask people to be considerate and not to use language that will further victimize the people that we're trying to support through this initiative, or to use hurtful or hateful language. Okay, so I have Robert, and then John. I'm not giving out last names just because not everybody wants that. So I'm going to go to Robert first, and let's open up your mic. Robert, I'm clicking you saying, please unmute your mic. Okay. I have another Robert right in the queue. So let's go to the second Robert in the queue. Go ahead. You've got, your mic is open. Go ahead, Robert. I was just saying, won't it be great in a year when we can do all of this in a church basement somewhere? We don't have to do the online. So I have Robert.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Robert, go ahead.
Sorry about that. So first comment is the traffic. And actually, I'm really surprised you put this across from Parkside School. But the traffic in the neighborhood, first of all, the bike lanes on Woodbine have diverted so much traffic onto the side streets. And the natural environment that we live in with the baseball, the hockey, whatever, we have people circling around our street constantly looking for parking spots. And you know what, we don't mind that. You know, everybody's here to have a good time. But now if you reduce this, I think that's just gonna just totally increase the traffic flow. And if you're talking about creating new parking spaces, that probably means congesting more traffic. But the one thing I really want to do is, you had all these wonderful participants. You have to have so many consultants with the City of Toronto, right? The City of Toronto doesn't have enough employees. We have to hire consultants like you and many others and bring all our MPs and MPPs and everybody on here. So I just want to ask everybody that's been on here so far consulting with us to tell us, they have a homeless shelter in their neighborhood, number one. Did they have people relocated from Regent Park into the Trillium building, number two? And I've got a number three here.
Okay, so Robert, why don't we start with your question about traffic, the impact on traffic. You know, for us to ask our panel members if they all have a shelter in the neighborhood, probably I'm going to take that as a rhetorical question, but let's just deal with the issue of.
Oh no, seriously, Why, when all these people come on here and tell me I've lived here for 50 years, I know my community better than anybody else here. You know, I've got 30-year-old politicians, okay, that are elected to do the right thing. I've lived here for 50 years, and I've got all your consultants that probably don't even live around here telling me about my neighborhood. I know more about my neighborhood than they do. So I want them to answer that. Do they have any of these facilities in their neighborhood, and literally 300 meters from their neighborhood? And did it affect their lives? And it's becoming a dumping ground, East York. So you unload the people from Regent Park. They've got refugees coming to Canada, which I have no issue with. They put them into the Trillium. And so what are we the new dumping ground for Toronto? You move your problems from downtown Toronto into East York. We've lived here for 50 years. It's a beautiful, traditional Toronto community. And everything you guys do seems to destroy it.
Okay, so let me jump in on that one. You're obviously sending a strong signal that you believe this will have a negative or deleterious effect on the neighborhood. And of course, we're approaching it from a different point of view, that every neighborhood in Toronto really should be supporting residents and have a diversity of housing across the city. We're not going to ask every panel member if they have a facility like this in their neighborhood. One of the nice things or neat things about tonight's panel, though, is you do have a lot of really top experts and different levels of government participating. Abby, let me go to you on this question, because we hear this a lot. We hear about from neighborhoods who say, really great idea, important, but not here. So, and I'm not putting that in a pejorative sense. We just hear that. We hear that from people. How would you like to address that when people raise that? It's a real world issue, or so they perceive it. They don't see it as diversity or a breadth of housing. They put it in a negative spin. Abby, do you want to try that?
Yeah, sure. I think I mentioned before that we have almost 11,000 homes like this already in our city. So we see them all across the city, and they've been developed over time, likely with the support of the City of Toronto and the provincial and the federal governments through other funding programs over many, many decades. And so they're already buildings like this, homes like this already exist in our communities. And in some cases, communities don't even know that they're there, or the fact that there are people living there with mental health issues or other physical health issues, that they blend in to community. The reality is that we have homeless people living all across the city in all of our neighborhoods. And so that's why we're taking a view that we want to spread out the delivery of new supportive housing all across the city. And that's why we've been looking for city sites across the whole city, not just looking to concentrate just in the downtown core, but looking to provide homes and spaces for our residents who are struggling with homelessness in every community, because we feel that that connection to community, for all of the reasons why we all love our communities, will also help people be successful. And if we can find people, as Laurel mentioned, if we can find people who are homeless in parks and hiding in alleys already in neighborhoods, then this is a great opportunity to bring them inside in the community in which they're already currently living, although they happen to be homeless right now. So that's why we're doing it in this way, and that's why we, over the months ahead, will be also announcing other sites in other neighborhoods across Toronto.
Great, thank you very much for that. Next, we're going to go, we have John, and then Derek, and then Stephanie. Let's go to John. Whoops, sorry. Apologize, I'm pushing on the wrong buttons here. John, go ahead.
Hey, Bruce, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Bruce, and thank you to the panel for your time and consideration. I actually had the opportunity to join the Planning and Housing Committee last Tuesday. At that time, I listed about 6 questions, which Councillor Bradford unfortunately did not answer at that time, but mentioned he would reply to me privately. It's disheartening that after multiple further emails, I have still not yet heard back. It's continually concerning to myself and others that we have a very limited opportunity to address our concerns. However, in this time now, let me attempt to ask one question. The question I'd like to dive into a little bit deeper is around community safety and impact of this proposal. It's curious to me to know that the panelists have listed the importance of an effective third-party manager, yet that organization has not yet been identified. Additionally, Bruce, lots of your feedback seem to be based on qualitative anecdotal perspectives, which I think is also a troubling approach to decision-making. Moving forward, I'm curious how we can establish an evidence-based model for evaluating this concern. Anecdotally, one of the participants listed in chat that there was a death at one of the Macy locations, which is quite recent. I'm wondering if we can identify quantitative metrics and criteria used to evaluate the projected outcome by Abigail. I'm also curious what tripwires can be put in place to ensure that our concerns are not impacted in a negative way in the future. And furthermore, I wonder if there is a negative impact, what the protocol will be for resolution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. So in this particular slide, maybe we can look at 3 different dimensions to the community safety. One is the safety to tenants themselves. And I think you're raising the issue of Macy, which was a tenant-related issue. And the second is the impact community safety in the neighborhood, in kind of the adjacent properties or the adjacent parks. The third one in particular, because of this site, would be the school. What, if anything, needs to be done on that. And I did want to go back to this idea of doing a SEPTID audit, crime prevention through environmental design, which is qualitative by nature. By its very nature, it is a qualitative approach where you actually work with people in the community to look for risk issues and what can you do to mitigate risk. So I think those are tools that you should be using. They're qualitative, they're not quantitative. And the other cool thing that I've seen at both 14 Division and 41 Division, 14 Division, the police station is right across the street, right? So they've already have a relationship, but at 41 Division, the police are very, very closely working with the operators. So again, that's a qualitative thing. It's not a quantitative thing, but it is an issue of setting up relationships that I think are vital to make this work. Abby, do you want to speak to the service provider and also to deal with John's question of how do you measure this? How do we know, how do we measure it? How do we look for things that might exceed a standard or a level of concern, when and if there is something that exceeds that level of concern?
Yes, and certainly, evaluation of other supportive housing programs is one of the reasons why we know that this approach will be effective. There was a great study done by the Mental Health Commission of Canada a number of years ago regarding Housing First, and really demonstrated how when you provide 24/7 staffing on site, you give residents a choice about where to live, you provide them with a food program on site, you provide them with casework support. Through that kind of staffing support, they're able to connect with the kinds of health support that they need. So one of the challenges of being homeless is that it's really difficult to manage any kind of healthcare issues that you have. It's hard to keep appointments. It's hard to, don't have somewhere where people can send you mail. It's just very difficult to kind of proactively manage your healthcare issues. And so when people move inside and they find a home, this is one of the first things that staff will support them to, is to get a doctor and address some of their health issues. And unfortunately, because many people have been homeless for many years, living in shelters or on the street, sometimes even when they move inside, sometimes it is a palliative care issue, and the health issues sometimes do get the better of them soon after moving in. The aim with the staff is to really make sure that the individuals are able to make progress on this by connecting them with both primary and secondary care. So it's great, the proximity of the hospital. And in terms of evaluation outcomes, it's really about both the staff supporting the tenants to see concrete improvements in their health and well-being. And that comes from having a safe place to sleep at night, a place that you can leave your belongings, a food program, the support of your peers and neighbors, and staff that you can really rely on to help you when it's not clear how you need to navigate the changes in your life. So those are all things that go to really making these buildings successful, and it's very much based on evaluation of other similar buildings.
Thank you very much, John. And John, you can also write to communityliaison@lura.ca and obviously send your questions to that number, and we can get back to that email address, and we'll get back to you with as many answers as possible. Next, we've got Derek, and then Stephanie, and then Brianne. So let's go to Derek. Go ahead, Derek.
Thank you, Bruce, for taking my question, and thank you for Brad for putting this on. I think it's important to get the information out there. I think we can sort of all agree that the communication hasn't been great to start with. And obviously there are a lot of concerns about what is happening as people just don't have the information. I have a pretty significant concern now, and actually Mayor Tory in his comments made it worse. I don't think he did that intentionally. What I want to know is who is ultimately responsible for this site. This is a site that's being built with federal funding on a city-owned property. Operating funding, what I thought was coming from the province. My understanding is that's not a guaranteed thing, and it's being operated by a nonprofit organization. It sounds a lot like nobody's responsible. And so, what I'm concerned about is that there's a lot of support for it now when we're in the middle of a crisis, and it's being sort of rammed through with extraordinary measures. But where is the 5 years from now when the community has to live with it? Who is going to be the ultimate level of government that's responsible for making sure that this is, there are successful outcomes still coming out of this housing department or housing installation? Thanks.
Bruce, could I take a crack first at that? It's John here.
Yes, Mayor Tory, and then yes, go ahead, please.
I did not mean to make anything worse. I'm just being honest about this. We're engaged in a discussion with the provincial government about the longer term, larger plans for supportive housing that Bruce made reference to at the beginning. And I think Abby made reference to it as well. And historically, I will tell you, there has been no doubt about the provincial government supporting supportive housing, because really the people who provide the supports are part of the healthcare system, looking after people who need some extra supports in their lives. But we have an ambitious plan to do much more than this, because we've simply decided to just go on building more and more shelters or leaving more and more people on the street was not an appropriate strategy. It wasn't humane. It wasn't sensible. It didn't even have a sound business case behind it. And so I'm engaged in discussions at the most senior levels of the Ontario government right now. I am absolutely optimistic that in fact, I've had a recent discussion with a senior minister last week. I'm absolutely optimistic that funding will not just be approved for this building or the next two, but for a program that we have over the next number of years, because they recognize both the humanity and the morality of doing it this way and looking after people who are vulnerable. And there's a strong business case. It costs way less to operate one of these, operated by these very capable nonprofit people, than it does to, for example, have all the emergency room visits and the shelter costs and hotel rooms and all the different things that we've done historically, which I just don't think we should continue doing. So I was honest in saying that funding is not 100% confirmed, but it will be before this building is occupied. I'm going to tell you that is going to be the case, period, full stop.
Thank you, Mayor Tory. Abby, could you just speak to the issue of how a group is given the mandate for this site, and you're going through an RFP process, I know, in terms of what the expectation is of the parties, because Derek just wanted to be assured that in fact that somebody is in charge.
Yeah. Well, there's a number of things that we do to ensure quality over the long term. So the first thing is that we're going to run a competitive process to pick the best operator for this site, again, looking at their track record and their experience in managing something very similar. And we're lucky in Toronto, we have a lot of really great agencies out there already doing this work. And we had Cota Health and the neighbourhood group who were the successful responders to our RFP for the sites at Macy and Dovercourt. So that's a really important fact. The site, the land that this building is on is owned by the city, and the building will be owned by us. We will lease that to the nonprofit operator, and through that legal agreement, we will manage their performance, both in terms of looking after the building and maintaining it, and also in terms of the staffing ratios and also the outcomes for residents. And so we look forward to doing evaluation and having that report out with community, and as has been mentioned, a great way to do that is actually to have a community committee that meets and stays engaged with the building over the long term, as Bruce mentioned on some of the other sites. So we're looking forward to working with that committee.
Thank you, Abby. So we're getting some great feedback from folks, and I want to try and get as many questions in as possible. I've got Stephanie and then Brianne and then Alan. So Stephanie, if you could open up your mic, that would be great.
Sure. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, great. So my name's Stephanie, and I live nearby with my daughter, and she goes to Glad Hill because she's in French immersion, but her main park is Stan Wadlow, so we're there all the time, and we're in the neighborhood. And I just wanted to say thank you to all the elected officials on the call for being united in doing this. And I wanted you to count me as a parent in support of this new housing, because I know we're in the middle of such a crisis across the city with homelessness, and I'm happy to see action being taken on that. And I'm also I'm happy that it's supportive housing like this, because I guess like I have two main questions. The first one is just maybe you could talk a little bit more about like what supportive housing is like compared to a shelter or a respite or something, because that's one of the main reasons I think this is a really good fit for a community, because I think it's going to be housing for people permanently who will become part of our neighborhood, and hopefully they'll have the wraparound supports that they need. Whereas right now, maybe you could tell a little bit about like I know I've seen people experiencing homelessness in the park and nearby, and so maybe you could talk about how this will solve that and how it might be more different. And then also
Stephanie,
I was just wondering how we get involved with if there's a community liaison committee, because I know there'll be lots of parents at our school and nearby who'd want to keep information flowing, because I know that there are people with concerns, and I think a steady flow of information and being able to share that among parents and neighbors would really help be able to make this something that's successful long-term in our neighborhood.
Great, Stephanie, thank you very much for that. And we'll go to Abby. This is not a shelter. It's not a shelter hotel. This is not a respite site. This is not a supervised injection site. This is permanent housing, affordable supportive housing. Abby, can you just make that distinction for folks?
So one of the most important things to understand is inside the building, these are studio apartments. So each resident who lives in the apartment has their own front door, their own bathroom, their own kitchen area, a living space, and a bedroom. So they have privacy and security in the same way that any renter would have in a multi-residential building. And they sign up to a tenancy agreement, and again have the same rights and responsibilities as any renter in your community already. The difference, the reason why this building is different to other rental buildings in the area is because it also has perhaps more communal amenity space. So a place where residents can come together to eat and chat and support each other. It also has a communal kitchen where food can be prepared as well. So those things, plus staff offices. So there will be staff on site 24/7, more than you would see in a regular rental building. And those staff have training in terms of social work, casework support, and also connecting people with primary and secondary healthcare. So it is very similar to any other rental building. It just has these wraparound supports layered on. And that can include things like helping people find a library, helping people find learning opportunities or jobs, supporting them to reconnect with family, supporting them with daily issues, such as finding their way to hospital appointments, things like that. So there's all kinds, the support offered is really tailored to the individual, but it comes with the staff who are there 24/7 in their offices supporting residents. But each resident does have their own home and their privacy, which is very different to a shelter where people live in a congregate living space without that privacy that you would see in an individual apartment.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you, Abby. So next we're going to go to Brianne and then Alan, and then I have someone on a phone, and the first few digits are 416-846. So I'm going to go to Brianne and then Alan and then 416-846. If we can go to you next, let's go, Brianne. Brianne, can you open your mic?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead. Thank you for participating.
Hi, thank you for taking my call, and I really appreciate you guys taking the time to take some feedback from all of us in the community. And I want to first say that I think that this is a really great concept. I think that the building looks really great. I have no concerns in that regard at all. I would say that predominantly my concerns lie with the parking in the adjacent streets as I live on Trenton Avenue. And obviously, of course, the issues of crime that have been brought up previously by other people who've been on this call. One thing that I'd like to ask, and BA did bring up the point of whether it was COVID or pre-COVID assessment of the parking in the area, and they did acknowledge that it was during COVID times. And that they would try to, layer on the fact that it was pre-COVID times to determine what the parking needs were in the area. I'd like to see a little bit more of that, and I think it would be helpful if you could share a link to this group so that we could take a look at what their evaluation looks like and what they're thinking, even with some graphics perhaps of where the parking is identified to mediate the issues with the parking on that parking site. I'm curious to know if there's been any consideration to permit parking on both Trenton and Cedarvale, because I do know that a lot of people do park on the street as their home parking. And I think that an increase of parking on those two streets could be detrimental with the community center and the pool and everything else. So I'd like to understand that better. And one BA comment that was made that I just want to say is that they want to encourage public transit. And of course, we definitely want to encourage public transit, but in the wintertime, when it's hockey and everyone's carrying their hockey equipment, that's obviously not going to be a viable solution. So I just wanted to flag that. And then finally, and I know that it's probably a little bit premature, but I want to mirror what John had said earlier in his call, that if people have an issue in the neighborhood, who is it that we're going to be in contact with? And it sort of sounds like we're not quite there yet. And if that's the case, I just really want to ensure that it's really clearly communicated, very open and transparent with everyone in the neighborhood so that we know who it is that we're speaking to. And if there are any issues that come up with regards to public safety and crime, that we have an opportunity to voice our concerns and that they're recognized immediately. And that's all I have to say.
Great. Thank you very much, Brianne. Can I make a suggestion? The issue of on-street parking, can we bring that to next week's meeting? We have a meeting on, I think, the 17th. And one of the issues that's come up with the parking consultants is the options for parking. And I know they're still doing work on that. Would the panel be okay if we brought that issue to next Wednesday's meeting? Does that make sense? Is that okay? Okay, great. And as you said, Brianne, there will be an operator and you will have their phone number and they will have a community liaison committee that they use so you can get involved in that. I want to make sure that you got that answer. Next, I've got Alan D, and then I've got 416846. So Alan, over to you. Alan, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for taking my call. I have a couple of comments, and maybe some of them can be addressed or not, but I have a daughter that goes to school at Canadian Martyrs, and she's a young girl right now. And my concern is that I did some homework on the weekend, and I looked at some of the other homeless shelters in the city, and there was converted apartment buildings, as well as Roehampton Hotel in the Young Eglinton area. And all you have to do is search Google and see all the newspaper articles based on those locations. And what happened was there was all kinds of theft went up in the area, bicycles and petty theft. There were numerous break-ins reported soon after, and as well public urination. And I guess my concern is the fact that I want to help the homeless, but I don't like the things that come along with homelessness, and that is addiction, mental health issues, and such. And I really do think you're opening up a Pandora's box here. And here's why I say that, because you have a park, a very big park right in front of this building. And it doesn't have a lot of access to law enforcement. It spans very wide and there's lots of places to hide. I've been in the park and I found some unsavory things, of which when I was there with children in the park, I gave to the people at the facility there to throw in the garbage. Another comment that I want to make is there's a Taylor Creek Trail and it's used extensively. by many people, young children as well. And I think this is just being set up for an unfortunate, some bad things to happen. There have already been some bad things happen in that park, some deaths without any sort of additional, I guess, issues to do with the park. And in my research, what I found was there was so much trouble in the areas that I already mentioned that they had to bring in 24/7 security. And law enforcement cannot get into that park very effectively because, again, there's no roadways to get in. There's lots of places in there to do nefarious activity. And Taylor Creek Park as well, down in the ravine. If someone wants to do some harm, it's very easily done. Those are my comments.
Alan, can I just make a suggestion? If there were a community liaison committee, is this something that you would feel comfortable joining in on? First of all, this is not like the Roehampton Hotel, just so that we're clear, it's a different kind of housing with different supports. But would you be willing to get involved in something like community liaison or doing a crime prevention walkabout? It's like an audit of the park or some of the adjacent properties. Is that something maybe you or other people on the call would be interested in? Because this sounds like it's something that people are interested in.
Yeah, I would very much would like to participate in something like that. I hope I'm wrong about this, but I think this is going to set itself up for there's going to be some unfortunate incidents that occur. And I've written down the names of all the politicians here on my list. And someone's going to have to, if something does happen, someone's going to have to be accountable because you're obviously pushing this through. And
Alan,
I'm concerned. There's a lot of young kids that are in that park, and there's a lot of young kids that use Taylor Creek Park. And I think it's a can of worms, and I hope I'm wrong. I don't think I am. If I've done my research, I've seen what's happened with not the Roehampton Hotel, but that's a problem. But there was some converted apartment buildings, and it's just gone downhill. And I hope for the best, but
we definitely want to work with you and the community to make sure that that doesn't happen. I'm not sure if there's anyone on the panel who wants to jump in, because I do know if we set up a community liaison committee, this is almost every month, this is one of the issues. And touch wood, it has not materialized in our meetings, but this is preventative work that we have to do. Anyone else want to jump in on this? I know we have 19, 20 people still wanting to speak. I think we've covered off this a certain amount, Abby.
Yeah, just really quickly again, it's, the process that Laurel mentioned to kind of work to find the right people who need the right supports, the matching of the people in the location with a nonprofit provider who's got experience and the right level of supports will really make this building a success. And that's what we're all very focused on.
Great, thank you very much. I have 416-846. You are next up, and then I have Gordon and then Cindy. And you know what? I'm going to try and get through as many of these online callers, and then we'll go to the written questions. So I'm just waiting for one person to say first-time caller. But anyway, let's go to 416-846. Go ahead. Can you open your mic? There you go. Go ahead.
Hey, hello everyone, and thanks for having me, and thanks for hosting this. This is great. So I'm just going to add another aspect to this because, I mean, I do have those security concerns based on best practices throughout the city that I've seen and what we know about some of these transitional homes, some of the shelters, some of the TCHD buildings that we've had problems with. But I'll discuss the infrastructure around it. So I did a tremendous amount of research years ago on traffic and traffic fatalities. So this area in particular, for those who don't know this area really well, like there are thousands of kids. Like there are hundreds of kids that use the pool directly across the street from this particular development. There's a preschool attached to the school directly on the corner of this development. And like I said, there are thousands of kids who use the park for city programs and throughout the day. I walk my dog every single day through that park. You know, I'm 6'5", I'm older, so I do feel comfortable at night, but that park is extremely dark as well. I've mentioned it to the counselor, but you know, we certainly need investment in terms of improving security and safety in the neighborhood as well. But with regards to infrastructure as well and traffic safety, there's no controlled intersection there. So when you put something there, when there's clear sight lines, we're going to have, problems unless there's a controlled intersection at the corner there, not the turn, but the actual corner of the building there. Because there's going to be a lot of people crossing the street, and cars coming around that wide radius turn, and I think we're definitely going to have problems, especially if there's vehicles stopping, dropping off things, if there's mail and delivery vehicles there, if there's people dropping kids off at the pool or at school. We're gonna create these blind spots where we could certainly be looking at the potential of a fatality or injury in this particular situation. So there's that, and then also the infrastructure in terms of sewage. And anytime you add a building like this, there are infrastructure needs. And is there any plans in place to improve those? So thank you. Appreciate you taking my call.
Can I make a suggestion? The issue of the lighting and the issues in the park, I think that is one of the things that we've got to address through a community liaison. But you've now raised a new thing, which is the safety related to the building in the corner. And Kevin, I'm wondering, you're working on site plan issues and the issues of setbacks, how far the building will be from the corner so that you can actually see around the corner when you're turning. Is that something you would feel comfortable answering?
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. Thank you, Bruce. So I think,
and can we just ask someone to bring up there's a slide that actually shows where the building is situated on that corner. Like if we can just go to that, and then over to you, Kevin. There we go.
Yeah, so I think, these are good observations. I think the plan you're seeing here on the page is our very preliminary plan. I think we're still obviously working on this. One of the other contributing factors is of course tree planting and shrubbery. You'll notice, for example, there's a shrub at Trenton and Cedarvale that's probably a bit of a visual hindrance. We will get comment, I'm sure, through the city review process if we're meeting the sightline criteria at these intersections. We think we're okay. We seem to meet all of the standard criteria, so we don't foresee any issues yet, but obviously we need to look at that closely. So that's a takeaway for us as we advance these plans.
Great, thank you very much for that. So next up we have Gordon and then Cindy, and then we have, I think it's McKellis. That's the name that I have here. So let's go to Gordon and then we'll go to Cindy. Go ahead, Gordon.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. And I know I've seen a lot of your questions in the chat and the Q&A, and there's no way I could keep up with you. So
no worries.
Go ahead.
I have, I guess, two key questions I wanted to ask.
Go for it.
The first one is, it relates to the mix of tenants at this facility. And I wanted to know, is it possible to have multi-room units that could accommodate families? Or is that, I understand it's not currently part of the mix, but could that happen? Given the fact that the City of Toronto is aware that there's a growing number of families that are affected by homelessness in Toronto, that the City of Toronto has also conducted studies which suggest there's an 8.5-year wait list for 2-bedroom units for families affected by homelessness. I'm curious if there's an opportunity to accommodate some of those families that are affected by this with this development, given the fact that there's a school right across the park, given the fact that there's a daycare, a pool facility, a hockey arena, baseball diamonds, etc. You could see that the multiple stakeholders involved in this community, could definitely help create an optimal solution or fresh start for a family that's in need. So that's the first question. The second question is, and also I'd like to put out there that all 4 sites are being proposed for single units. So maybe this might be an optimal location to consider family units, if that's possible. My second question, or not second question, but second topic was, of the 7 proposed modular developments, how many of them will be in East York? Will these developments be fairly and equitably distributed throughout the City of Toronto in both white collar and blue collar communities? Can you confirm that there will not, whether there will not be another location until we see some equitable distribution in neighborhoods like Forest Hill, Rosedale, Lawrence Park, or some of the other affluent neighborhoods? 2 comments made that every community needs affordable housing. I completely agree with that. I am for affordable housing, but I'm looking, my concerns are about the fit of the solution that you guys are providing and the fit with the local community.
Gordon, I'm
So-
going to hold you there because your second part had 3 parts. So we're just going to try and get through these. Abby, on the question of the mix in terms of men, women, adults, families, children, what can you tell us about that? And then I'll jump to the second piece of that. What can you say about that, the mix of tenants?
Yeah, so the focus of our initiative on modular housing and the funding, also the focus of the funding is really around chronic homelessness. And really the vast majority of people who are homeless are single households. And so that is why we've determined that we would like to bring forward a studio apartment building to cater for singles, but we also agree that family housing is badly needed. And so in many of the Housing Now sites, one of which is also in this ward, you'll be seeing a much broader mix of family and singles affordable housing in some of those developments, like the one on Queen Street East. But for this particular program, this particular funding, our focus really is on chronic homelessness and therefore on singles.
And this will be men, women, ages different with?
Yeah, that's right. It's going to be based on need, going through a coordinated access program, so you can anticipate a mix that's very much reflective of the mix that we see in our homeless population generally.
Gordon also asked the question about other modular sites and are they being shared around the city? And also you mentioned this Housing Now. There are other Housing Now sites in Beaches East York, and there's one over on Victoria Park. So there is other housing, but in terms of modular housing and this particular style of supportive housing solution, can you just give us a general, is there another one coming to East York? Are they across the city? Or could you just tell us a little bit about the distribution strategy?
Yeah, so we've got a number of things on the go. We've obviously got the Housing Now sites, which are on city land, and they're kind of affordable housing for the average person in Toronto. So they're a different housing program. We see those sites all across the city. You can go on our website and see a map of all of those sites. In terms of the modular and also the acquisition program that's being funded by the federal government in partnership with the City of Toronto, again, we're aiming for a broad distribution in many, many different communities. Now, I can't say which communities they will be in, as we have to roll out a very similar engagement process in each community. But as those sites become public as well, we'll be putting them on our website in a map, and you'll be able to see the distribution. But we're looking to really provide a good spread across multiple communities.
Great, thank you for that. I'm just going to ask my colleague who's handling the slides, if you could put up the slide for people how to get their name on the list. I had one person through the chat say she can't figure out how to get on the list. So if there's a little hand up icon, if you can use that, that's the way you get on there. And then we have 20 people on the list. We have 300 written questions. So my suggestion is we take advantage of the folks that are waiting so we can get them to speak. And then the written questions, we may have to put those into a document and bring those back. So let's go to McKellis, and then I have Michael, and then I have Ian with 2 eyes. Okay, so McKellis, you go ahead.
Hello.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you very much for joining us.
So my question is to John Tory, if he's still on. Is he there? Hello?
Yes, yeah, go ahead with your question, and then the mayor can jump in or other panelists, but let's just hear your question. Go ahead.
Okay. My question is you know, in this process, normally in the democratic process, you're able to make concessions or object to what's going on. Unfortunately, in this process, this is not the democratic process that I'm used to. Being born in East York and raised in East York and dealing with these in the past, not this exact application, but other developments. So my question to Mayor Tory is there no concession that you can make on this development, i.e., let's give an example, scale, or changing more to family use, that low funding family use for what's available across the street. You know, putting 65 single male or female across the street from a public school, a pool, a hockey rink, baseball diamonds. I mean, it's more fit for family. So my question is, in this process, is there room for concessions here to change some of those units or lower the density? And I have a second question.
Go for it. If you ask the question, then we can make sure that the right panelist is ready for you. So I know you do want to ask the mayor, but what's your second question? And then we'll just figure out that one.
Well, my second question is regarding the parking and the traffic. Like, I'm going to be honest with you, I do cut through the streets sometimes because the traffic on Woodbine's, it's just ridiculous for the amount of people using the bike lanes. Sorry, Brad, but I'm being honest here. Is that not a concession as well? There's going to be more people parking on the streets and circling to find parking. So yeah, I think the gentleman that did speak about the traffic is spot on. And no offense to BA, I think Mark Jennings, is it? How could you really get an accurate number if you're not really looking at what's being used there? Like, you know, I know you're being hired by the city, and you're being paid by the city. Are you really giving us an accurate number? Is there a third party, another report that we can get from else?
Let me just stop you on that particular issue. The gentleman that we've called on the panel is a professional engineer. He has an obligation, professional obligation to give his advice. So he will put that in writing. It goes to the city. You will be able to see that report. I don't want us to take issue with our panelists, and they're trying to give you the best advice that they possibly can. Let's take a minute. Mayor Tory, you were asked the question just about, is there any room for give and take in terms of the composition or the size? And that was the question from this gentleman, McKellis.
Well, first of all, Bruce, thank you for the question. And I would just say that we're here. There's 343 people, I just looked, that are here right now. We've had 200 questions, and including yours. And we're here to listen. And there's been a lot of suggestions that have been made tonight, which are going to be taken away. The principle of what we're trying to do, which is to provide supportive housing for people and to provide a much better answer for homeless people experiencing homelessness. The principle doesn't change, but I think we're here to sort of get input on all the different things that have been discussed tonight from top to bottom. And so I can't make any commitment because it's not my place to make a commitment to say we're going to do this or do that. But we're here to listen, and I'm sitting here listening, and I've been responding and writing to some of the questions, and I'm sure maybe some of the officials and others that we have helping us will answer your question. But this is that the whole purpose of this meeting is to listen to what people have to say.
Thank you very much for that. I made a mistake and I skipped over Cindy. And so I'm going to go to Cindy next, and then I'm going to go right back up to the top of the list. So Cindy, go ahead. And I apologize for skipping over you. Go ahead, Cindy.
Hi, Bruce. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity to speak, first of all. I'd like to echo a few things that Gordon previously said in terms of the mix and the makeup of the units. This is a neighborhood of families, and it would be ideal if we could at least fit in a couple of families into the 64 units that are planned for the site because of the school being right across the street and the park and all the amenities. It just seems very appropriate for a family setting, which would make those families feel more welcome within the within the community itself, because we are very family oriented here in East York. So that's one thing to consider. And why not families? I know you guys have chosen 64 single units, but why not family units included as well? That's my first question.
Okay, so can I make a suggestion? That issue has been tabled. It's been raised twice, and I think that's a takeaway. But your point is well made, and certainly we've heard that from other folks. Let's go to your second question.
My second question is definitely you've heard a lot about the parking situation, the concerns around here. I live just across the street from this development that is being planned, and I can definitely echo everything that has been said tonight about the parking. And the BA Consulting Group study, I must say, has definite flaws in it in terms of figuring out what exactly is the day-to-day usage of that parking lot. What I'm very confused about is you guys have chosen to use a very actively used site in the neighborhood versus a vacant site or lot to build a housing unit such as this. With the other two units that have been built across the city, what I believe and have researched is vacant lots were used for those settings as well. And that it would probably be more optimal than using an actively used site to support a hub of activity going on in a park that supports the entire east end of Toronto. So what I don't understand is why not choose a vacant site versus an actively used site?
Okay, so here's my suggestion. Thank you for that. We did have a little bit of information from the Create TO from Michael Whelan, the vice president there, about their site selection process, but the corporate real estate team is also part of this in terms of taking city assets, city land, and trying to make the best use of those. So they're part of the team. And I'm just wondering if that's okay, if I could ask one of our team members from the corporate real estate management team, and I think I've got Lisa Barossa on the line. Lisa, I'm not sure. Can you just speak to this issue about the use of a parking lot versus a vacant green space? Or in Macy, it was a park, and on Dover Court, it was the old police station. And this particular site is a free parking lot. Lisa, do you want to try and tackle that question?
Hello, I think that would be better for Anne-Marie to answer. I could answer process-oriented questions if you don't mind. That is what CREM would be as a proponent to speak, but that would be Parks and Recreation's better fitted to answer your question, Bruce.
Okay, super. I really appreciate you being here, and thank you for that suggestion. So this whole question of this location versus other locations and how the city evaluates these properties. Anne-Marie Nasser is a director with the Parks, Forestry and Recreation, with the capital planning side of Parks, Forestry and Recreation. And I'm just wondering, Anne-Marie, do you feel comfortable jumping in on this question about this particular parking lot and its utility versus turning it into housing?
Well, I mean, I am Parks, Forestry and Recreation, and obviously this is a parking lot, and the determination was basically made through, through a variety of other city staff. It is a parking lot, and it is something that, we are working with, CREM and the other divisions to look at offsetting the loss of the parking. And in terms of the uses, residential, et cetera, there are other kind of staff that are addressing that specific issue.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
We are looking and working with our partners, including the TDSB, to secure use when they're not using their parking lot and parking space to support our users. And we would also look at increasing bike parking and bike share within the park. I've taken note of a lot of the comments coming through on the chat as well on this matter. So thank you for the opportunity to listen.
Bruce, could I just jump in quickly? It's Abby.
Yep.
I just wanted to build on some of the criteria that Mike Whelan from Create TO mentioned earlier. The city in trying to deliver 1,000 units of supportive housing this year and 1,000 modular units in general has really looked at all of our land. We've looked at over 50 sites. We're still looking and evaluating many sites to find the best ones to bring forward. And we're looking at different aspects of that site, as Mike mentioned. So the size, how flat it is, the environmental aspects, as well as the location of them and where they show up in relation to other community amenities. So it's not an easy process to bring forward sites that are suitable, ones that we can develop within the kind of timeframes that we're looking at for the delivery of supportive housing. So trying to get these sites that are ready and suitable that we can open this year, and again looking at continuing to look at sites for next year as well. So it's a challenge to balance all of the criteria and find sites that we can bring this funding towards and get open in such a short period of time.
Thank you for that, Abby. Next, I've got Michael, and then Ian, and then Brian. So, and now for some reason, I still have 21 people waiting in the queue. Michael, let's go to you.
Hi. I have to say that I'm extremely frustrated and disappointed with this process. I have written to the mayor some time ago, never got a reply. I presented last Monday to the Housing and Planning Committee. One of the councillors laughed at me during my statement, and none of the councillors replied or answered my questions or asked any questions. At that same meeting, the curling club brought up the issue of their parking and wanted that taken off the table, and yet it's presented today as a possible solution for parking. The Councillor Bradford has nixed the idea of additional street parking on Gledhill because of safety, and yet that's still listed today as an option in a place where there's even more children than Gledhill. I submitted an email to Abby Bond, a very respectful set of questions, never heard a reply. And we were asked to pre-submit questions tonight, and I did so. And those were, my questions didn't come up when you did the pre-submitted questions.
Michael, you now have the mic. So
yeah. So I'm just saying that it feels very disrespectful, and I really, there's two questions I'd really like to raise. One is, and we asked for it last Monday, we've asked for it before. Former Mayor John Sewell brought up the issue of safety. If there are solid data and evidence and reports to prove that this model of housing is safe for the residents and for the community, then please give us those reports. We've asked for them, they have not been forthcoming, and I think it's just ridiculous that you haven't led the whole thing with these reports to allay the fears of residents. As you've heard tonight, there's lots of fear. The second question I'd like to ask, and I know it's been tabled, but I have zero confidence that this process will change anything. I think you're just playing Tetris with these buildings. You've got a building falling from the sky, you found a place to put it, you're going to drop it there. Today is International Women's Day. I want you to imagine that we brought a group of single mothers and children to that site today. Single mothers who are in precarious housing situations, housing insecurity, poor quality housing. And we told them that you're going to build the housing in this site with subsidies, and it's going to be safe, wonderful housing. And across the street, there's a daycare and a school and a splash pad, 3 children's playgrounds, a tobogganing hill, a skateboard park, a pool, an arena, a clubhouse with children's programming. And then we told them, sorry, you're not going to get to live there because they've earmarked this for single adults. I would like someone who's involved in the planning or one of the politicians to give a response to those single mothers on International Women's Day today, how you can justify the squandering of this site on single adults when it is so clearly meant for families.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Michael. So 2 quick things. One is on the website, there are a couple of studies that relate to this whole issue of community safety. So I want to make sure that you don't overlook that. One, I think, relates to British Columbia, and one's been done by the Wellesley Institute. I may have that wrong, but I'm pretty sure that they're on the website. The second issue, and I think we've discussed it a little bit, but you're reiterating because you think it's obviously vital, and that's the issue of families versus individuals. And I know that we have 8,000 people a night sleeping rough or in shelters or in hotels. So, and some of whom are families, some of whom are individuals. But I want to make sure that those 2 points are caught. One is that there is this, there are data and there's studies on this issue from other jurisdictions. We should definitely see that. And second, the issue of there is housing that is being built for families. This is not the proposal for this site. Abby, do you want to mention anything else about this whole, it's a really key point for the neighborhood, and I've heard this before. We're right across the street from a school. Wouldn't it be great for families? When you have people living rough, sleeping in encampments and sleeping in shelters, 8,000 people a night, how do you square the circle?
You know, we're very much trying to do both, right? We're trying to develop and bring forward city sites, where we're seeing family housing being built in this ward and other wards across the city. And we also see this huge need in relation to singles. The majority of people living in our shelters and living in our streets are single households. That is where our real pressure has been, especially through COVID. So that has been our priority for the development of the modular housing sites. But we accept that families also need affordable housing, and that is why you will see a greater mix of unit types in some of the other city sites being developed across the city.
Okay, thank you very much. I have Ian and then Brian and then Sabrina. Ian, go ahead. Ian, I have Ian, and then Brian, and then Sabrina. Ian, go ahead. I think you need to unmute your mic. Ian, go ahead. There you go.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead. Thank you for calling in.
Great, thank you. So I've lived in East York for about 10 years, and I have kids that attend Parkside. And so I have a simple and a blunt question. Has the decision been made to proceed with this initiative, or will the city listen to the clear opposition from the community and press pause? The public consultation process has been deplorable. No information was provided until very recently, and this emergency meeting and the politicians in attendance make it clear that this is lacking. In particular, my major concerns are about site selection, as a lot of people have voiced, and there are a lot of serious and valid concerns that raised today that need to be addressed. So, looking for an answer. Do our voices matter, or is it just going to be moved ahead with regardless of the opposition?
Abby, I'm happy to start on the process question and then bounce it over to you. So, Ian, the City Council came up with a plan to develop 40,000 affordable housing units, 18,000 of which were supposed to be supportive housing. 1,000 of those are supposed to be modular units. That plan was approved by City Council, I believe it was 2019. Last year, in April, City Council looked at the issue of modular and said, how can we get this done as quickly as possible? Phase 1, phase 2 would include 250 units on various sites across the city. The first phase of that was done last year. The second phase was just announced. So the reason you're hearing about it is because, frankly, the phase 2 was just announced, and we're having a meeting within, I think, 10 days or whatever, 2 weeks of it having been announced. So City Council will consider these sites on 2 different occasions. They're going to consider these sites this week with a preliminary report, and then they see these sites again, I believe it's in June. I may have that wrong, and I think it's up on one of the slides that I had earlier. My understanding is May 3rd, we're going to have another community meeting, and then it goes to City Council again in June. But keep in mind, the council's already agreed on the direction, and council's already agreed on the funding. This is a strategy that council has agreed, and the phase 1 and phase 2 are funded. So that essentially green light has been given to the program. The site specifics are now being addressed. So now is the time to be focusing on site factors, site parking issues and design issues and local neighborhood issues. So now is exactly the time to address the issues that you're raising. But keep in mind, City Council has a direction and a strategy and funding to move forward, and but now's the time for community input. So Abby, I don't know if you want to add to that. If you
no, I think you covered it, Bruce. And we're pleased to hear the community feedback, and have been listening to all of the comments and questions, and we'll be taking those away, and also look forward to the meeting next week as well.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we're going to go to Brian, and then we're going to go to Sabrina, and then Margaret. And we're let me just say it's 9 o'clock, and the meeting was scheduled to go until 9. So I'm going to make a suggestion before we go to Brian. Let's put up the slide about how folks can provide information if you're not able to get your question in tonight. you can write. So if there are 371 questions in the written queue, if you would like to submit your question, you can send it to communityliaison@lura.ca, or you can go to the website, toronto.ca/modular housing, and there's a form that you can fill out with your detailed comments or suggestions or opposition or in favor. That would be great. I should also mention, if you are interested in being on a community liaison committee, it hasn't been set up yet, but you could also write in and say, I'm interested in being more involved on a month-to-month basis to see how we can make this work. So please make sure that you go to the website or send in an email. Next Wednesday, March 17th, we're going to do another meeting, and hopefully people who haven't had a chance to ask a question will be able to get their question answered then. Now, my suggestion is we go for another 15 minutes. And then we ask Councillor Bradford to wrap up. So we may not get to everyone on the list. Are we okay with that? Can I just ask the panel if you're good to stay for another 15 minutes? Great. Okay, thank you very much. So let's go to Brian, and then I think we have Sabrina.
Great, thanks very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Great, thank you very much. And I appreciate everybody's time tonight to address the community's concerns. I just want to preface my question with a brief comment. I'll be very brief. I heard the response to the previous question in terms of this being a process, this being the start of a process. The reality is that this process has started months ago, in keeping with City Council direction for sure, but the site selection process having been done in a vacuum. And I would think that the community, as you can hear today, have good ideas to bring forward, not only for the site specifics, but also in the site location. But my question is this: looking at it from the lens of the people that we're looking to support, and I should also say that I'm in fully supportive of this type of housing development in my ward, and indeed even in a location closer to my own backyard. The question that I have is, in light of the graphic that was shown earlier this evening about the support services in the area for the people that are going to be housed in this unit, why are we locating this development around 2 kilometers away when there's certain sites, I'm sure, that are closer to the Danforth or to other areas of the ward that would be of better benefit to the residents for access to shopping, to employment, to public transit, etc. I would be interested to hear the answer to that.
Okay, maybe we should bring in Michael Whelan at Creatio. Michael, I know you did the initial slides tonight about site selection. Can you just touch on, again, how this site was selected? And the question the gentleman had was really vis-a-vis the service mix, as opposed to the topography or the site, or the size of the site, about how it fits in with some of those services that people will need.
Sure, Bruce, and thank you. Yeah, no, I mean, it's really a combination of all of the criteria, quite frankly. As I mentioned, we started off with about 50 sites across the city of Toronto. We narrowed that down to 12, and then in terms of the overall program, we're down to 5 sites right now. And in terms of actually selecting a site, once we sort of landed on a site, we go through a series of due diligence in terms of environmental, geotechnical, hydrogeological. We look at site services and constraints and everything else. So in light of the time that we're looking to undertake this work that Abby really pointed to earlier, I mean, there aren't necessarily, there are not a multitude of sites that can meet within the timelines. And so you take a look at what's available, you look through the considerations of which sites or social services are one of them, but you don't necessarily have the luxury of having a site that's closer to the Danforth or closer to these social services. And so, you know, it's in as much as you may not be happy on the site that we've landed on, it actually meets the majority of the criteria that we've looked for and is in reasonably good close proximity to the social services. So it's not an exact science, but as you work through the various criteria, that's where we've landed. And this is one of the best sites that we've been able to come up with as part of the overall timeline going forward with the requirements that we've been given.
Okay, Michael, thank you very much for that. I've got Sabrina and then Margaret and then David. Sabrina, you are next up. Or did I? Yeah, go ahead, Sabrina. Sabrina?
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. I wanted to kind of make a comment with a bunch of questions, basically about the differences that we've already discussed about shelters and the modular housing initiative. I feel like we're just being pacified by saying that they're different, saying that, you know, shelters or that the modular housing initiative will have locations that offer 24-hour support, individual rooms, indoor gathering spaces, etc. That is the same as, and I apologize for bringing this up again, the Roehampton and the buildings on Broadway. They are the most recent locations for shelters since COVID, and so they represent the most current information that we have. So that's why I'm using that. But in addition, when you say that the residents will have a tenancy agreement and that they're paying 30% of it from their income or social assistance, that to me says that 100% of it is being paid by the government, that they have no skin in the game. Am I incorrect in thinking that? Using their social assistance to pay rent or having their social assistance removed because of the supports that are being put in place for them to be housed here, that only decreases the amount of money they have in their pocket, which ultimately will lead, as I've seen before, increased criminal activity to support habits or a return to homelessness so that they can get that full paycheck. And the next thing is when we look at these units and saying that this initiative will have on-site support, what does that look like for people who have dependency issues? What does that support look like? Is it support so that they can get something to help them through the day? Is it programs to help them fight their addictions? Are you actually setting them up for success to stay off the street? Because a lot of people who are facing homelessness, the reason why they're homeless is because of addictions.
Okay, Sabrina, I appreciate that you've asked several layers of questions, but I want to make sure that we also get to the other folks that are on tonight. So you've asked about the level and nature of supports that people will have on site to help them if they have complex needs, if they have health, mental health, or addiction needs. You've asked that. Can we just go to and get an answer on that piece?
So Bruce, I was actually going to cover the issue about the shelter allowance piece, because I think the question was if residents are paying that money on rent, that they'll have less money for other things, which may lead them to make bad choices about the rest of their income. So for most people for everyone who's on like OW or ODSP, there's a shelter portion of that payment, they call it, or the housing portion, which can only be spent on housing. And so it is not money that they could, if they didn't spend it on rent, that they would be able to spend on other things. So I think the key issue that's different is the nature of a tenancy agreement and the fact that renters in this building are like renters in any other building, and they have to ensure that they look after their apartment, that they don't make life difficult for their neighbors. So they have both rights and responsibilities that you would see in any tenancy agreement, and that's enforced by the landlord, who's also on site with staff, but who are also doing that in a intentional and compassionate way, providing supports to help people be successful. And so that, as we've talked about, could be very individualized. It could be somebody who needs help getting their medicine from the pharmacy, reconnecting with a long lost relative, helping them with food preparation and shopping, making sure that they can find a GP, a doctor, so that they can get access to mental health care, or substance use support. So it could be a whole variety of things. And the important thing is that we pick a nonprofit operator who has lots of that experience in other buildings in Toronto and has been successful in bringing and has like the staffing complement who have the training and experience to deliver those kinds of supports on site.
Okay, thank you very much, Abby. So I'm going to go to Margaret and then David. And then unfortunately, we're going to have to close off the speakers list. And then after that, I'll go to Councillor Bradford to provide some wrap-up comments. And as you can see on the screen, there is a slide that shows you how you can get your comments in, and we can get ready for next week's meeting, because obviously there's a lot of things to talk about. So let's go to Margaret, and then we're going to go to David, and then we will go to Councillor Bradford. Margaret, go ahead.
Okay, Stan Wadlow is a very large park, and I wondered if there's some way to provide a parking lot within Stan Wadlow Park, because it's the park users and the community center users that need and use the parking. So is it possible to put parking in Stan Wadlow?
Okay, thank you for that. Why don't we take that away, because I know you've got your Parks, Forestry and Recreation folks on tonight, and you've got your parking people on tonight. Maybe they can take that away and bring that to the next meeting, because that plus on-street parking plus TDSB, they're talking about all kinds of different options. So why don't we thank you, Margaret, for that, and then take that away to the next meeting. And let's go to David for our last question. David, go ahead. David?
Thank you so much.
Great.
Just being mindful of the time, and how I want to know from our elected officials on the line, how is it that we can support our new neighbors to set them up for success, either be it through employment opportunities or otherwise?
Okay, so here's my suggestion. Councillor Bradford, we're going to go to you to close, but let me just make a suggestion. One of the frequently asked questions we didn't get to tonight is, what can we do to help? What can we do to make this more successful? And one of the things I'd like to suggest is if we're able to set up a community liaison committee, that the things like how can tenants be supported through employment, through local services, through interaction with the neighborhood. I think those are all items that could be brought to a community liaison committee, and services, including employment services, legal services, health and mental health, are all part of the mix of services that tenants need for this to be successful. But if you are able and willing to be on a committee, the community liaison committee will be working with the local service provider to make sure we support the tenants if and when this goes ahead. Does anyone else on the panel want to speak to the issue of how can we help tenants to be successful? Anyone else want to jump in on that? Abby?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And it's something we heard in the other neighborhoods when we began the engagement process, is that there were people who were really keen to support the new residents with, like you say, things like offers of employment or other kinds of support. And as Bruce said, the best way for us to deal with that is to have the community come together through that community liaison committee. So it worked really well in the other two neighborhoods, and we're pleased that it's something that's under consideration for this site. So thank you for your offers.
Thank you very much for folks who've submitted their questions. I'm going to go to Councillor Bradford for closing comments, and then Councillor Bradford, if you bounce it back to me, then I can just explain what's going to happen next in the process. Thank you very much for being here and for sponsoring this, Councillor Bradford. This came about at your initiative, so thank you very much. Go ahead, Councillor Bradford.
Yeah, thanks very much, Bruce, and thank you all for being on the line tonight. We were nearly 400 folks at one point, and I've been reading the comments, I've been reading the Q&A, I've been listening, I've been taking a bunch of notes. It's I also want to thank all of my colleagues who have been on the line tonight. Mayor Tory, who is still here with us at the top of the call, answering the questions in the chat, responding to people's questions directly. That was great. And all of the city staff who have been here tonight, and helping us get this back on track. As I said at the beginning, my main goal, and my colleagues as well, all of your Beaches East York elected officials, we have been connecting. We're here to listen. And, I want to be very clear with folks. This is going to be a supportive housing site. This is going to be a modular project, and it is going to be moving forward. And I know many folks are angry and not happy about that. I've heard it in your emails and the phone calls we've been having in the discussion. And this is not going to be easy, but we need to come together to make it work. And David, the last caller, chiming in there, he had a good question about how to support future residents. How do we make sure folks are successful? And while we didn't hear necessarily a lot of that tonight, I have heard a lot of that in different places, whether that's phone calls or emails, in the park and at some of the doors. And I think that is the type of East York mentality, a community that is about building people up, that is going to help us land this in a successful way. And I suspect most people are going to get there. And as Bruce pointed out, the CLC Community Liaison Committee is a great place to start. I've also had folks reaching out and saying, you know what, I have a small business in the area. I would like to provide employment opportunities, help get some of these folks back on their feet. And so that is the East York mentality. That is the community building spirit. And, I think that's where we need to focus our energy. We do not have every answer yet. And, in my view, that's not a bad thing, because it means we have an opportunity to shape this project. A couple of things I've been working on already. I've reached out to Superintendent Strobel at 55 Division, and he's very well aware of this proposal and is ready to work with his team and the staff at 54 and 55, as he already does, to help us address those community safety concerns. We had a motion at Planning and Housing last week where I asked that we have a number of things put in place before anything gets approved. And one of those things was the safety audit. I've been out to modular sites in other communities, and as soon as we can after COVID, I will be going on site to visit with staff and residents at the phase 1 modular housing sites. I've been out to Macy, as you know. I've been speaking with the 2 counselors with sites in phase 1, and we have Deputy Mayor Anna Baila, who's been on the line listening to the entire meeting tonight. Councillor Mike Layton as well, and they want to hear your comments as well. They want to hear your feedback also. There are a lot of important pieces that we need to get sorted out here. And again, we are at the beginning of the process. I know that this is an expedited process to match the urgency of the housing crisis in our city, but there's still a lot of work to do. So the CLC, getting that going, which I asked for last week as soon as possible to get that done. We need to get that going. And I think the staff team have heard loud and clear. If you want to be a part of that, shoot us an email, get in touch with the consultant team or my office, and we'll make it happen. We need to solve the parking pieces. We heard tons about that. We're working with Parkside and DA Morrison, Michelle Arts, TDSB trustee on the line. She's here with her staff. They're listing. We know that we need to do more on the on-street parking option also. Get the full parking study, get that out there to the public. You want to see it. We want to share it. And we need to do a deep dive on the family units question. That's something that I've heard loud and clear on the phone, at the doors, in the park, and online tonight. And, I'd like to have a better understanding. This certainly is a site that, when you look at the amenities in the area, when you talk about the supports, a lot of supports for families there. So I'm not prepared to close the door on that discussion. I want to have it. I want to explore it further. And I've certainly heard you there. So a lot more I can say, but I'm going to wrap it and pause until next week, where we will be back on the line doing it all again. And we're going to do it as many times as we have to land this thing successfully. Thanks again for coming out. Back over to you, Bruce.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bradford. And with that, we're going to bring tonight's meeting to a close. A reminder that we're doing another session like this next week on March 17th. And you can find the link to that. It'll actually be done through WebEx, not through Zoom. So you'll find that on the city's website at toronto.ca/modular housing. There will be a link there. I think they open the link at about 6 o'clock so that you can get on and you can get in the queue. And we have another meeting scheduled for May 3rd. Between now and May 3rd, there's a lot of work to do, obviously. So you'll see some additional details on the parking, and hopefully by then we can do a community safety audit. And so that we'll have some things to some progress. The presentation next week, we might adjust it a little bit, but I think we're going to take this away after tonight. So it may not be exactly the same presentation to start the meeting off. We'll see where that goes. Reminder, you can always send your comments or questions to communityliaison@ lura.ca. You can visit the website, which is toronto.ca/modular housing. And while you're there, you can fill out the comment form. And you can also volunteer to be on the community liaison committee. And I know we'll know more about that as the terms of reference are put together. Let me thank everyone for attending tonight's session. Members of the public, this is really, really important for you to be here and for us to hear from you. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you to our panelists and to Mayor Tory and to our MP and MPP and our school trustees. And maybe hopefully next week we can get Angela on the line. We can get her line opened up, because I know Angela Kennedy, our TCDSP trustee, was on and we couldn't get through to her, but hopefully next week she can join us. And thank you everyone for being here. Be safe and have a good night. Thank you for coming.